Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've got an update on the Russia-Ukraine situation. Feels like Groundhog Day. You can see the update here. Russia-Ukraine war latest. Trump is once again threatening Putin with massive sanctions after Moscow rejected the summit plan. There was potentially going to be a meeting between Zelensky and Putin. If you look at any of the betting, the odds on that meeting happening at this point within the next few weeks is virtually zero, unless there's a major change in the dynamics with the United States. As the mediator, Trump said, I can facilitate this meeting. It needs to happen between Putin and Zelensky. And Trump could say, well, maybe I should even be in the meeting, but now Putin won't meet with Zelensky unless there are concessions before the meeting from Ukrainians. So let's take a look at this. Zelensky says Russia does not want to end the war as Trump's peace plan suffers another blow. And it says Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has accused Moscow of doing anything to avoid a summit between the two countries in a potential blow to Donald Trump's plan for a peace deal in Ukraine. Speaking at a press conference alongside the NATO chief, Zelensky said, the issue was Russia did not want to end the war. And you can see Zelensky saying he's not ready at all in terms of the war ending. When asked whether there was a possibility he would do nothing if Putin did not come to the table, Trump said he would wait and see whose fault it is before making a move. Trump says, quote, I think in 2 weeks we'll know which way I'm going, he continued, adding that he would need to decide whether to impose massive sanctions or step away. Okay, so Trump has responded to this where it looks like Russia is very coy. They don't want to meet. You read into that. Seems like they don't want to end the war, at least not right now. Whether they want more land, they want more leverage. They don't think they're negotiating from a place to where they can really extract what they want in the situation, because the situation is pretty crazy when you think about the security guarantees. And whether you want to dress it up and say, well, it's NATO or it's the EU, it's a more so NATO-esque guarantee when you think about the UK being involved in this, not just the EU. So if the UK is involved and if the United States is involved in security guarantees, not with troops, but with apparently some type of aerial support, which has been negotiated between the United States and Ukraine. Ukraine has said, if we're going to end this war, we need some type of security guarantees from the United States. Trump has said, well, we're not putting our troops in Ukraine, but we can give you some type of aerial support. That's what I read into the negotiations in terms of that, because it seems like Trump is really energized to try and solve this. This was one of his big campaign promises. He wanted to end this war. Of course, it's a lot more complicated than just saying it. It was more of a hyperbole when Trump said it. The idea was that we would be more cordial with both Ukraine and Russia. It wasn't just going to be a one-sided thing. We were going to try and work with both sides. But as we've seen the past several months, it really has been a Russia issue. And we understand that they do want, whether it's more leverage, whether it's a better standing in terms of their ability to negotiate and demand certain things during a peace deal. The problem, I think, for Russia is these security guarantees make Ukraine like a proxy NATO country. If there are European troops in Western Ukraine to guard against a potential reinvasion by Russia after a peace deal, it just feels like that's an even bigger encroachment by the Western Europeans into Eastern Europe and within Ukraine, which a lot of Russians view as their territory, and it previously was their territory under the Russian Empire, under the Soviet Union, up until 91. And then they did have it as a puppet state virtually until 2014. So I think they're probably thinking in terms of this peace deal, my guess is if it's just a land, like I don't even think it's a land issue at this point. You're talking about the two southern oblasts being returned to Ukraine in exchange for Russia fully annexing the Donbass, with potential more area within those two oblasts, because the Donbass is not the two northern oblasts, it's part of the oblast. So it's not even the full area. And Russians basically have like 90% of control of both of those oblasts. So they would even be retreating from those two oblasts back to where the Donbass region is. So there would be a lot of retreating and a lot of land regained by Ukraine, which is why you can understand why Ukraine would be happy about this deal And Russia would say, I mean, we want the Donbass. This is a strategic important position for us. There's a lot of there, minerals and resources in the region, but we're barely getting anything. It's like maybe 8%, 9% of the total area. I mean, right now they have occupied 19% of the total area. But again, if you're talking about a peace deal, it does seem like they may withdraw from the two southern oblasts. I've heard they might withdraw completely. I've also heard there's something about them pledging not to encroach any further, although, I mean, that would still be them keeping the 19% of the area. But the overall point of this situation, it seemed like there was some, and now people are saying, well, Putin is playing Trump. Putin never won. But it's like, Putin is playing Trump for what, a week or two? Like, it's really irrelevant whether or not you think Putin is doing this just to delay some type of major sanctions. This is Trump's decision one way or another. Trump has said, well, I'll let you know in a week or two. Putin understands Trump, in terms of where the U.S. economy is right now, does not want to impose major sanctions on Russia. Russia already has major sanctions from the West as it is. We didn't take those off. We've been able to work around them. But the question is, so now there's going to be even bigger sanctions. My guess is they're the only thing I could see Trump doing, and he's already been aggressive about this. This is more so to try and force Russia to the negotiating table, which honestly it doesn't look like it's worked. The idea is to pressure the Eastern countries and major Russian trading partners. If we do hit Russia with even more catastrophic sanctions and maybe tariffs, that Russia will not be able to turn to the Eastern countries, specifically India, who buys a ton of Russian oil. And you hear what the administration now is saying. India just uses it as straight up arbitrage to where they then sell it themselves at a markup after buying it from Russia. So I don't think India wants to stop doing that. That's why Trump pressured India with like a 50% tariff and said it's going to keep escalating and going up the more trade that you do and the more energy that you buy from Russia in the way of oil. The only thing I can see is Trump maybe saying, okay, we're going to hit you with 100% sanction or 100% a tariff, on India or other Eastern countries, and threaten the living hell out of those countries. If you want to sanction Russia even more, you're going to deal with heightened energy prices, with higher crude oil. That was like the Israel-Iran situation when we had such a great energy situation in the United States in terms of the gas prices. And it was like a 12-day thing, but it really only ticked up for like 2 or 3 days. And many people were like, well, this is so unfortunate. We had such an amazing energy, oil cooperation in terms of the price, the global price of it during the Trump administration, the second term. I can't believe we're going to squander it dealing with this Middle Eastern conflict. But the conflict was solved. There was really no, you can call it a war. They say that the 12-day war, the United States was involved for like 2 days. So that was something we avoided. So I don't think Trump wants a repeat. This is coming off a day ago or 2 days ago. You had Jerome Powell, the head chairman of the Fed, say and hint, yes, we're going to probably be doing a rate cut. They're going to look at the inflation numbers that come out around the 10th. They're having their meeting on the 17th. It's a 0.25 basis point cut. That's the expectation. Maybe a 0.50, but very likely 0.25. There's like an 80% chance of it. The FedWatch tool says the same exact thing. So does Trump really want to create a more unstable domestic economic situation in the way of major sanctions against Russia on top of the sanctions that we already have against them? Or is it maybe, see, this is the other thing Trump can do. He can pull back completely and say, this is not our war. This is an Eastern European conflict. In ways, Trump has done that by saying we're done straight up giving weapons to Ukraine. I don't care how old the weapons are. I don't care where they come from. That was always the liberal justification. Well, they're older weapons. Trump has said we're not doing that. We will sell the weapons to Europe and then they'll give them to Ukraine, or we will do a deal in which whatever we give to Ukraine, we get back in the way of minerals. And by the way, that's another way for Ukraine to keep the United States staked in Ukrainian territory, is that mineral deal. Although, to what degree? It's not like we're going to be getting back $200 billion from them. Now, you can debate how much money we've given Ukraine. Trump says it's like $350 billion. The estimates that I've seen are like 160, 170. Liberals will say about 120. But I think it's around... See, and then what is this? Like... out of memory, doesn't even make sense. I have like 600 gigabytes left in memory storage, but whatever. The point of it is what you look at a situation like this. Trump obviously is angry. He wanted there to be the meeting, Zelensky and Putin, with him or without him. Maybe you can try and salvage it. And see, you've got this thing auto playing here, dude. It's like you can't even go to these sites without there being 100 things on it. If they're not paid prepaid sites to where you have to pay to even see the information, like subscription based. But the point is, Trump in his statement said, well, we'll see. I'm going to give it 2 weeks. We'll see what happens, because Trump does not want to sanction Russia. I don't even think Trump really wants to play crazy hardball with tariffs on the Eastern countries, although he has done that in the past to get better trade deals. But we'll have to see what ends up happening. It does seem like, the way I saw it, Putin was demanding some type of concessions from Zelensky in order to even have conversations. And so the idea is, well, what are those concessions? You can see Putin fawns over Trump as light at the end of the tunnel for Ukraine and Russia. So that, I guess that's encouraging, but that's a public statement. It really matters what's going on behind the scenes, and it seems like behind the scenes, Putin is not, at this point, interested in meeting Zelensky. It's weird because I didn't even see anything reported on it. I just saw on Polymarket, it was like the chances of Putin meets with Zelensky are now at like 3%. I was like, wait, how did it go down that much? Well, apparently there's some talks, and Putin does not want to meet right now. The Russian delegation does not want to meet without some type of concession from Vladimir Zelensky and the Ukrainians. And Zelensky knows there's going to be territory they're going to have to give up in terms of compromise, especially if they get land back. I think they'd be willing to do that. And especially if they become, I don't even know what you consider Ukraine with these security assurances. You have to consider them a proxy NATO country. Remember, the NATO head chief said there's no way Ukraine joins NATO. That ship has sailed. It's not going to happen. And it's also a bordering country to Russia. You're inviting World War III when you're talking about NATO being encroaching on to Russia that much, to where there's a border conflict. Then what? All of Western Europe and the United States has to defend Ukraine, and you bring all of our troops into it. It just makes for a much easier chance at a heightened global situation if you bring Ukraine. But what are we doing with like what are these soldiers going to be doing in Ukraine? If there's any type of reinvasion by Russia, are they going to be helping Ukraine? Are they going to be fighting for Ukraine? Is that seriously what we're talking about? I think that's the big issue for Russia. To me, Russia wants Ukraine under their sphere of influence, but what is the way in which they do that? It seems like this peace deal seems pretty favorable from what I see, pretty favorable towards Ukraine. Yes, you're losing Crimea. It's going to be recognized, but they already lost Crimea. They were never going to get Crimea back. They were never going to get areas in eastern Ukraine back outside of NATO sending troops, which would be a massive escalation, and they don't want to do. You're never going to get that land back. So there's areas within eastern Ukraine you have to just count as a loss, especially the Russian-speaking areas like the Donbass region. So if those areas, and it seems like Zelensky's like, all right, well, let's focus on, that's why when Zelensky visited Trump, it was all about the security assurances and the security guarantees. And it's like, well, maybe we can get some land back in those southern oblasts that border Russia. At this point, Crimea, the ship has sailed. It sailed in 2014. I don't know how they're just not going to get it back unless the Russian economy collapses or something. And the same thing with depending on how much land Russia wants within the Donbass. At this point, Russia can keep taking land incrementally. They're doing it very slowly. People have to understand that. People say, well, Russia's taking all this territory. It's a slow slog. Yes, they're advancing the front line westward. A lot of it's because of the nicer weather we've had the past few months. They've been able to do it. Once winter hits, it's going to be a bit of a challenge for them again. But when you look at the situation, it seems like Russia probably wants more land at this point, and it gives them more leverage in negotiations. That's what I would say about it. But if you're Trump, this is a big decision now. Because if there isn't an agreement from Russia, and Russia, by the way, is sitting here looking at this and saying, well, if it's us against Ukraine, eventually we can just take over the entire country, or at least half of the country. Now, how much would they have to expend in terms of their military to be able to do that? Ukraine it's a big country. They've gotten 20% of it. They've gotten 20% of it in 3.5 years. I don't know. At a certain point, would Ukraine just collapse? because of them running out of soldiers in the army. I mean, this is all stuff you have to think about, because obviously Russia has a bigger army than and a bigger military than Ukraine. They've got a much bigger infrastructure. At a certain point, we don't know what point that is. It is going to become a very dire situation. You could already say it is a dire situation for Ukraine, but we got to be fair to Ukraine. I've heard a lot of Republicans say it's a dire situation for Ukraine. I heard them say it in 2023. Well, it's 2025 and they still have about 19% of the country. They've barely advanced. In fact, Ukraine pushed them back, especially in northern Ukraine, after the initial offensive that was launched by Russia. But I do agree, if it's just Russia against Ukraine and you're the Russians, we don't have to come to some type of agreement that we don't want. Why would we do that? NATO is not going to be aggressive with us. They're not going to invade. They're not going to send troops in. If they don't have troops and it's just Russia against Ukraine, how about some North Korean troops coming over to help Russia as well? Then we see no reason why we shouldn't get what we demand. And we know that they do want the Donbass region, that they do want a demilitarized Ukraine, and they obviously do not want NATO presence in Ukraine. And the Ukrainians are going to say, well, then why would we come to an agreement? I mean, for Ukraine, their leverage is based off of NATO help. If they have the Western European countries, if they have the United States, which they kind of do at this point, because Trump is sending them stuff, although it's through, purchases by the Western European powers and by the mineral deal, Ukraine can demand more, and it's NATO propping up Ukraine to try and give them something in this peace negotiation, because if it's just Russia against Ukraine, Ukraine's going to have very little leverage based off of a military problem. I mean, they just do not have the armament that Russia does. So if you're talking about negotiations, they're going to lose significant leverage if they don't have NATO and the United States in specific behind them. But that's why Trump's kind of come back now to supporting Ukraine, because he wants to pressure Russia into some type of deal. And it's not to the point to where Zelensky can just say, which is what he's basically saying right now, we don't have to come to an agreement on anything. We're going to have our demands. I'm not even going to meet with you unless you agree to certain stipulations. Now that there's pressure on Putin, the hope is that he will meet. But right now, at least, it doesn't seem like he's meeting. Putin is saying the right things publicly when it comes to Trump, saying that, Trump is trying to get peace. And it seems like we could have a decent relationship. He invites Trump to Moscow. But I don't think there's any way Trump would go to Moscow unless there is an actual peace deal and we get some type of arrangement with the Russians, which I know many people have been saying we should do. We should have some type of diplomatic agreement with Russia. It would make sense in terms of our number one adversary being China, and swing Russia. So that's something that a lot of people are talking about. But it does require Russia to come to the table. But from a Russian standpoint, I understand it's like we're going backwards. The idea, in the sense, is to do a land invasion into Ukraine in part. And the main reason the list is because of NATO encroachment. Well, now the peace deal is NATO troops actively being inside of Ukraine. So yeah, it's just like, what are we doing here? So it seems like we've got a severe difference in terms of negotiations when it comes to what happens after the peace deal. You can have the Donbass, we'll retreat outside of the other oblasts. The West will agree to acknowledge Crimea as Russian territory, at least I think. I mean, who knows, with Germany and some of these other Western European countries, they still don't like that, which I can understand, but it seems like it's headed that direction because Zelensky has really shifted his focus from trying to keep all the territory. Remember, Zelensky said, well, it's in our constitution, we cannot cede land. Well, it doesn't really matter. If they take land, I mean, you can say you cannot cede land, but at the end of the day, I believe at this point, it's about security assurances, and Zelensky wants pretty much all of NATO or the United States and the Western European powers to have presence within Ukraine to try and prevent a reinvasion from Russia. And the Russians do not like that, and they want a full demilitarized Ukraine. And I thought maybe there could be a solution of a limited armament, but Ukraine keeps their military. But I don't know if that's going to happen. So we'll have to see. But now it's this question, it's this holding pattern. And the question for Trump is it worth to try and put more pressure on to Putin? Because there's been all these threats with major sanctions. the sanctions heightening even more, because Trump knows if you put even more sanctions onto Russia, the effectiveness of the sanctions will be limited because of the trade that Russia does with a country like India, a country like China. I mean, it seems like there'd be a very hard ask to get China to do anything in the way of curbing Russian imports. I mean, why would China do that for the United States outside of Trump somehow? I mean, but then you're talking about there being a significant blowback from the domestic economy side of things in terms of major sanctions or major tariffs, higher tariffs onto India and Russia. You're talking about potentially a domestic economic problem, a stock market short-term crash. Although I wouldn't call it a crash, it would be a short-term, downtrend in terms of the prices. I mean, right now the stock market, the S&P 500, the Nasdaq, they're all at all-time highs, and I mean, they added like 800 or 900 points yesterday. So, and now you've got the rate cuts coming. We don't want to mess this up with the domestic economy right now. And you introduce even higher sanctions onto Russia, and you start threatening some of these Eastern countries, it becomes a problem in terms of the domestic side of things. Especially, we've got such a cozy situation right now in terms of inflation being at bay for the time being at 2.7, the rate cuts coming. Right now, the current interest rate, 4.5%, going down potentially. Do we really want to mess that up? So there's a lot to think about in terms of this and what Trump's going to do. He said he's going to give it 2 weeks. I don't know. He's giving it 2 weeks to see who's in the wrong between Zelensky and Putin. That's what he said. So we'll have to see. But either way, guys, make sure you like the video down below. That's going to do it for this one. Also, follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.